rigged election, how people from both parties are responding to Donald Trump's allegations. Pushing back ISIS, the new fight to retake Iraq's second largest city. Plea for peace, U.S. negotiators seek a ceasefire in Yemen. And Pope Francis canonizes 7 new saints, including one known as the Cowboy Priest. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, October 17th, 2016. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. With just 22 days left before electing a new president, Donald Trump ramps up claims of a rigged election. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton deals with more email fallout. Chief White House correspondent and political director Lauren Ashburn reports.
Donald Trump ramping up his claims that the 2016 election is a scam.
The election is being rigged by corrupt media, pushing completely false allegations.
And I have no doubt the national media is trying to rig this election with their biased coverage in Hillary Clinton's favor.
Trump has chastised his fellow Republicans for not taking his claims of a rigged election seriously.
I think there's truth to some of the things that he lays out on this. I just don't think it's that constructive to make this the campaign issue.
It's an insult to American voters, and it's an insult to county registrars to say that America doesn't know how to run an election.
Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton is once again dealing with email fallout. WikiLeaks releasing thousands more of what it says are her campaign chairman's emails. The Clinton campaign has neither confirmed nor denied their authenticity. And the FBI completed another document drop Monday from its investigation into Clinton's State Department private server.
You don't get to destroy 33,000 emails that are under congressional subpoena and not have your case put before a grand jury. You go to jail for that.
New polls still have Trump keeping it close in battleground states, but CNN's poll of polls shows Clinton with an 8-point lead nationally going into Wednesday's debate. Lauren Ashburn, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Lauren. Investigators in Hillsborough, North Carolina sift through evidence after the county Republican Party headquarters was torched. The Orange County GOP office was firebombed overnight Saturday. Nobody was hurt when a bottle filled with a flammable liquid was thrown through a window. An earlier news release said the building next door was spray painted with the words, "Nazi Republicans leave town or else." A state Republican official calls the attack political terrorism. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. A top U.S. general says Iraqi forces are on the verge of retaking Mosul, Iraq's second largest city. This comes just hours after Iraq's government announced a large-scale operation against that ISIS stronghold. Wyatt Goolsby reports tonight.
Brian, the Pentagon says Iraqi and Kurdish forces are taking the lead in the operation. The U.S. is supporting them with airstrikes, with some American troops serving as advisors on the ground.
The military offensive to retake the largest Iraqi city held by ISIS is now underway. The Iraqi Prime Minister announcing the full-scale operation, the most complex since American troops withdrew from Iraq 5 years ago. More than 25,000 troops, including Iraqi soldiers, Sunni tribal fighters, Shiite militias, and Kurdish forces are taking part. They're facing an estimated 5,000 ISIS fighters holding the city of about 1 million people.
This is going to be street by street, house by house fighting. There will be significant limitations on the use of aerial assets because the enemy will be intermingled with the civilian population.
Counterterrorism expert Sebastian Gorka says the battle could take weeks or even months, and it's not clear how soon before any of the forces enter the city. But if they are victorious, it would be a serious blow to ISIS.
It really is a marker. If they can't keep Mosul, it's going to be very hard for them to demonstrate that we really are the Islamic State.
The United Nations Refugee Agency calls on all parties to spare the lives of civilians. The State Department says they are working with the Iraqis to make sure they protect innocent people. But aid groups warn that Iraq is on the verge of another humanitarian crisis. They say a mass exodus of civilians could overwhelm refugee camps.
ISIS at one point had controlled nearly a third of Iraq and Syria, but over the past several months, Iraqi troops have been pushing them out. ISIS now controls Mosul and a few other small pockets in Iraq. Brian?
Thank you, Wyatt. The United States and Britain seeking a ceasefire in Yemen. Secretary of State John Kerry says it would help both sides move to the negotiating table. Yemen is divided between its government and Shiite rebels known as Houthis, who control much of that country. They deny firing at nearby U.S. Navy ships. The U.S. military responded by taking out 3 radar facilities belonging to the rebels. James Phillips is a Middle East expert with the Heritage Foundation. Jim, what sparked this war in Yemen?
Well, I think this civil war was sparked by a power struggle by various factions, some within the army against each other, and then the Houthis took advantage of the situation to push forward and seize the capital. But the fighting continues with horrible results.
Would you say this is one of these proxy wars with outside forces trying to determine what's going on in Yemen?
Yeah, I think it is rapidly becoming one because Iran has thrown its support behind the Houthi rebels. The Saudis are lined up behind one faction of the army, and another faction is with the Houthis themselves. So it's a very complicated, kind of kaleidoscopic war.
Very interesting situation where a missile was actually fired at U.S. Navy ships. The ships fired back. How involved should the U.S. get in light of this incident?
Well, the Houthis said they didn't fire it, although they control the territory on which these radars were based. They may have been obfuscating the truth a little because they may not have access to these kind of weapons. This may be one of the factions from the army that is known to have imported some of these weapons from China back in the 1990s. However, if Iran has given the Houthis this kind of weapon, then the Houthis themselves could be responsible. But I think the U.S. had to respond once those missiles were fired at our ships. I would prefer to respond even stronger. But I think the administration is correct to try to stay out of the civil war because really our number one enemy in Yemen is Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and in that sense, this is kind of a distraction from that fight.
What if the rebels win? What turns out there in Yemen? What will it be like?
Well, if the rebels win, it'll be an authoritarian government similar to the one that was there before. So, you know, it's not that much of a big change. However, Yemen's economy and agriculture has been tremendously weakened and destroyed by this. There'll be a huge need for humanitarian aid. And if the rebels win, they'll probably remain at swords point with Saudi Arabia, and that'll leave Iran even more of an opening to get involved.
From the standpoint of the U.S., what is the best possible outcome?
I think the best possible outcome would be a situation in which there's a political agreement between the rebels and the government, and both turn their guns on Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Unfortunately, it's hard to see the dominoes falling in that order.
We haven't heard a lot about this. Is it being overshadowed by the war against ISIS?
Yeah, I think ISIS has really taken a lot of the oxygen out of Middle East coverage, at least in recent months. But Al-Qaeda, I would argue, in the long run is an even greater threat because they're much more patient, whereas ISIS rushes forward and now is getting violently whittled down to size. Al-Qaeda is lurking in the shadows and growing like cancer.
Well, we appreciate your expert perspective. Jim Phillips with the Heritage Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And prosecutors in Mexico report an arrest in the kidnapping and murders of 2 priests in Veracruz state last month. The suspect was caught Thursday after allegedly carjacking a couple in the capital along with another person. Police later connected the suspect with an arrest warrant for the kidnapping of the priests. Father Alejo Nabor Jimenez and Alfredo Suarez de la Cruz were found bound and shot to death along a road near Poza Rica, September the 19th. Before a crowd of 80,000 people in St. Peter's Square, Pope Francis canonizes 7 new saints. They include Argentina's so-called cowboy priest. Mary Shovlin reports from Rome.
Jose Gabriel de Rosario Brochero is Argentina's first saint, known for serving the poorest of the poor in the country's peripheries. Pope Francis says he and the other 6 saints are men and women who struggle with prayer, letting the Holy Spirit pray and struggle in them. Argentina's president, Maurice Macri, and his wife came to Rome for the event, along with thousands of pilgrims waving their flags. Patricia Zabala from Argentina calls Brochero our saint and says he gave away all he had to help people, especially the poor. Clad in a poncho, Brochero rode around the country on his donkey Malacra to bring comfort to the poor and outcast and those suffering from leprosy. He died in 1914 after contracting the disease from one of the faithful. Argentina's first saint, canonized by its first pope, held up as an example for all. In Rome, Mary Shovlin, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, President Obama announces a record number of high school graduates. What challenges lie ahead? And Marian pilgrimage. The Knights of the Holy Sepulcher travel to Pompeii. Thank you for joining us this Monday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. President Obama says high school graduation rates have reached a new high.
We recently learned that America's high school graduation rate went up to 83%, which is the highest on record. That's good news.
The president says demanding more from teachers and students is paying off. He spoke at Benjamin Banneker High School here in Washington, D.C. Graduation rates there jumped the most of this school year, 2014 to 2015, nationwide. The education system still faces many challenges. American students are still getting lower scores on national math and reading tests. Members of Congress are concerned a new Obamacare rule will force doctors to perform gender reassignment surgeries. In many cases, it would violate the doctor's religious beliefs. In a letter to the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, 45 members of the House say, quote, "This rule, for the first time in history, requires doctors to perform gender transition procedures or treatments on patients, including children, even if the doctor believes these procedures could be harmful." Joining us by Skype from his home district in southeastern Pennsylvania, Representative Joseph Pitts. He is leading the effort to get a response from HHS. This seemed to come up by surprise. How and when did this rule become part of Obamacare?
It was proposed and actually issued on July 18 of this year. And HHS mandated that doctors must perform gender transition procedures on children, even when those procedures may be physically or emotionally harmful to a child.
In fact, scientific studies show that many children grow out of this so-called gender dysphoria. Isn't HHS ignoring science here?
They are. Their own experts concluded that these procedures are risky, and they do not require Medicare or Medicaid patients to cover this. So they exempt the government programs, but are mandating this on doctors, against better medical judgment.
So it would affect all doctors other than those in the Medicare program?
Yes, it would. It would apply to some 900,000 doctors, virtually every doctor in the United States, and apply this. Require insurance companies to cover this, and this is even against a doctor's own best medical judgment. They're not allowed to even consult with other doctors. They're required to do this if requested by the patient.
What can Congress do, if anything, to keep this from being implemented?
We have raised the issue with HHS. We've asked some questions. We've sent a letter to them. If they persist, the only way to overcome a rule or a regulation or an executive order is with action by the House, the Senate, and the President. So if the President disagrees and vetoes, we can't even get legislation passed in a divided Congress like this. So the only thing you do is have a lawsuit, and a lawsuit has been filed by the Beckett Fund, doctors and hospitals in 5 states have filed a lawsuit against this federal regulation.
Well, we appreciate you bringing it to our attention. Pennsylvania Representative Joseph Pitts, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
The Knights of the Holy Sepulcher are on a Marian pilgrimage in Italy this week for the Jubilee Year of Mercy. Members held a procession in Pompeii along with Holy Mass on Saturday. The order's apostolate, dating back to the 11th century, is support for the Church in the Holy Land. Their leader, Cardinal Edwin O'Brien, says their contribution is substantial.
Each year, our members, 30,000 around the world, donate $13 million to keep the faith alive in the Holy Land. And our members are very generous. We encourage pilgrimages to the Holy Land to show our solidarity with the Christians there who are so few in number and very often not very well treated.
Pilgrims are following in the footsteps of Blessed Bartolo Longo, founder of the shrine in Pompeii. He is the only beatified lay member of the Order of the Holy Sepulchre to date. 100 Years Wrong, the campaign against Planned Parenthood's somber anniversary. And underwater discovery, the history behind the pirate treasure found off the coast of New England. Today we celebrate the feast of St. Ignatius of Antioch on the 17th of October. The bishop was martyred less than 100 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. He chose to die rather than deny Christ. Thanks for joining us this Monday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Founded 100 years ago, Planned Parenthood is a growing political force. President Obama congratulates the nation's largest abortion provider. The president tweets, "For a century, Planned Parenthood has made it possible for women to determine their own lives. Here's to another hashtag 100 years strong." Jeannie Mancini is president of March for Life. What is your response to that tweet from our president?
Well, disappointment, and I guess I really want to say abortion is never empowering for women. It's a lie to say that abortion is empowering for women, because that's kind of the underlying message here. Abortion takes the life of a baby, it wounds the life of a mother, and there's nothing positive and good about that. There's nothing strong about that.
So it was founded in 1916 by Margaret Sanger. Abortion was not legal at that time. What was the purpose of Planned Parenthood when it was originally founded?
Well, of course, Margaret Sanger was a known eugenicist, a kind of a Darwinist, basically, and she believed in the survival of the fittest. She saw, sadly, certain populations like African Americans or people with disabilities as unfit to be humans, and so she advocated for birth control and really advocated for the elimination of certain races and people with disabilities. So that was its founding, documents. Basically, they were based on those underlying philosophies.
So that is the legacy that President Obama was congratulating. How strange is that? So why does the federal government fund Planned Parenthood?
Well, thanks to our wonderful pro-life legislators, the House did vote to defund Planned Parenthood. And after those horrific videos came out about the trafficking of baby parts, the Senate almost voted. They were just shy of a few votes to defund Planned Parenthood. So I think, we just have to keep fighting. We will get Planned Parenthood defunded when we get a pro-life president in office. I think, these things take a long time to do, but it's really horrific because people don't know that Planned Parenthood is our nation's largest abortion provider. And we're really, funding abortion by funding Planned Parenthood.
Those videos from the Center for Medical Progress got a lot of play. A lot of people have been talking about them. Do you think they'll have a lasting impact in this debate?
Well, I certainly hope so. We saw today in some of the WikiLeaks that they saw those videos as being terrible for Planned Parenthood and talked about Cecile Richards, the president of Planned Parenthood's testimony before Congress, and how it was similar to Hillary with Benghazi. So I think, the media pretends like it was no big deal, but the truth of the matter is they were absolutely afraid, because it showed abortion and it showed the abortion industry for what it is.
Would you say that mainstream media helps facilitate this portrayal that Planned Parenthood wants to put out there as pro-health, activists for health?
It's a good question. The mainstream media never uses the A word, abortion, when they're referring to Planned Parenthood. They always use, false rhetoric, basically, like women's rights or reproductive choices, but they don't talk about Planned Parenthood being the nation's largest abortion provider. And it's shocking, but most people don't know that Planned Parenthood does abortions. And so I think that's one thing that we have to put forward. Now, of course, Planned Parenthood is $1 billion industry. Their CEO makes $1 million every year, and they've got got incredible marketing, incredible strategy, incredible messaging. So they certainly do their part to tee up, the mainstream media for these kinds of messages that are supportive of them instead of telling the truth.
At our parish over the weekend, Jeannie, we put out 4,000 little white crosses, symbolic of the number of abortions in a single day. That's one step. What other steps can your organization, other pro-life organizations take to turn this tide?
Well, part of it is just teaching people the truth about Planned Parenthood, what they do, what their founding was about, and also the truth about life, that life is empowering for women. So, for example, our theme this year for the March for Life, and we continue to talk about it all throughout the year, was basically pro-life is pro-woman. It's pro-life and pro-woman go hand in hand. That's the opposite of what Planned Parenthood stands for, but it is the truth, and it's very freeing and beautiful.
Jeannie Mancini with March for Life. It's always good to see you, Jeannie, and thanks for the good work you continue to do.
Thanks, Brian. It's such a blessing to be with you.
And a centuries-old shipwreck off the coast of Massachusetts leads to treasure, gold and silver, and an infamous link to American history. In the murky waters off Cape Cod, divers sift through sand and seaweed for pirate treasure. The Widow was a slave ship that was overtaken by the English pirate Black Sam Bellamy 300 years ago. It went down in these waters in 1717, taking the pirates' plunder with it.
It had the cargoes and treasure of over 54 ships on the one ship. It hit a sandbar, it capsized, and all of that was buried in the sand.
The wreck of the Widow was discovered in 1984, but it's taken more than 3 decades to find its treasure.
We had no idea of what we discovered until we started going through the collection. Our coin collection goes all the way back to Ferdinand and Isabella, right up to 1717.
Some marine archaeologists say they're skeptical that the full extent of the claimed riches are on their way up from the depths.
I'm just going to get in here where it's been cracked a little bit.
Meanwhile, back at the lab, another several dozen coins are recovered from the muck.
This is one of our recent concretions that have just come up, and we've x-rayed it. We know that there's about at least 60 silver coins in here, along with gold dust and chopped up gold jewelry.
So far, nearly 200,000 artifacts have been recovered. But the expedition leader says the real treasure is in the shipwreck's history.
The fact that these coins paid for human beings on board a ship that was a slave ship, captured by pirates, a third of whom were of African origin, most of whom were former slaves.
Very poignant. And visitors can see the ship's bell, the coins, and other artifacts at the new Widow Pirate Museum in West Yarmouth, Massachusetts. We thank you for watching. For our EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. We leave you tonight with more images of this weekend's beautiful canonization of 7 new saints from St. Peter's Square. Good night. God bless you.